How's it going? Happy Friday. Uh, I hope your Friday's going better than mine. My dad texted me this afternoon saying that my mom's not doing that well, which is never good. But you know, and I also over the last week I had two interviews for a job, which I just found out I didn't get, which is pretty disappointing. As far as the job thing is concerned, I'm a little. I'm obviously I'm disappointed because it seemed like a pretty good job. Not that far from here, paid pretty well. People seem pretty nice. I guess it just didn't work out for one reason or another. They didn't tell me why. Just it's just that it was a no. Um, I think that jobs are, companies tend to be very closed about telling you why because the less they say about these things the better, at least legally, that they never really in trouble if they don't say anything, but if the moment they start telling you things, the more likely they get in trouble. I understand. I'm not gonna hounding them. I don't think I was a 100% good fit, but it seemed like a good job. I think I could have done the job very well, but it was kind of annoying because they gave me a little project to do, um, see if I did the work okay. If I would actually sort of fit in with the job itself. And it took like, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, which I find pretty annoying because, those 2, 3 hours of my weekend with my wife around. And, you know, well, anyway, but as I was going to say, that I'm kind of heartened by just having the job interview or job interviews because um, up until recently, it's been really hard to land an interview. I know that the whole work environment is up in the air at the moment, where people are quitting their jobs for various reasons. A lot of it is that these jobs are now requiring people to go back to work in the office, and a lot of people are not into that. Which it's fine. Everyone has their reasons for doing something or not doing something, but it is. I find it really insulting that people can be so choosy about their jobs when there's people like me on the outside who would take a job even if it meant going into the office. It's crazy to say that out loud because that's the way work operates. Now I understand that some of this stuff can be done at home, especially because so many jobs are done through the internet, through email or web applications, or even sort of standalone applications that connect to the internet. However, it's kind of insulting that people can be so choosy about things and really kind of, I don't know, rubs me the wrong way because it's kind of like they're so ungrateful um, uh, about having a job at all. To me, it's just like I don't think you deserve a job in the first place if you're gonna have that attitude about work. Um, and so anyway, I kind of, well, anyway, like, so one of the things is that the fact that I had two job interviews with the same job means that obviously I was worth a look in. I was worth just sort of trying out. As at least having a conversation, which just wasn't really happening in the past. Before that, since the new year, I've had two phone interviews. This last two were on Zoom. I had never used Zoom before. I had used Skype. It's very similar, but uh, anyway, I had two phone interviews with recruiters. So over the past month and a half, I've had four interviews uh, for three jobs, none of which actually ended up working out. So I suppose that as much progress as I feel like I've been making, it hasn't actually landed on anything. But I suppose that a lot of companies with the current environment, as far as the economy is concerned, that a lot of interest rates might be going up very soon, and people might want to wait and see how much money they have available, what their budgets are, and uh, also they want to see what kind of environment they're going to have at work, right? If they're going to need a lot of space, if they're going to start sending people back to work, or if they're going to do some sort of hybrid, half the time at home, half the time at work, or completely remote. I'm not really into the idea of completely remote, mostly because there is something to be said for being in the office and kind of turning to your neighbor and say, hey, even if it's just to shoot the breeze, um, it's a bit of socialization that you just don't get with your cats and your dog. You just can't really have a conversation with them. Although I've seen some funny YouTube videos that seems to be going on a little bit. My cats are not as chatty. Um, Plus, they've been there. They know exactly what I've been up to today, so they don't even need to ask. One thing I would say about working at home is that it's nice that you can actually do other things while you're working. You could do some laundry. Um, you could take a break and cook something. You could, you know, you can do all kinds of things around the house. You can play your music loud. You can kind of have the radio on in the background while you're working. It really depends on the nature of your work, obviously. But I just I need that kind of get me out of the house sort of thing. And if I can't just wander off and over the last couple of months on nicer days, I've been out taking like an hour and a half, 2 hour walks around the city, sort of getting reacquainted with the city. It's been several years since I've worked here or I've lived here, and just see what's different. Some places I've forgotten about. Some places I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's still there. Nope, it's gone. That kind of thing. Um, some things just haven't changed, which is nice, and some things haven't changed, which is not nice. It's like I wish you would have solved this problem while I was gone. What the hell have you guys been doing? Anyway, so the job thing is a little bit frustrating. I went on last night and looked at some jobs on job sites like LinkedIn, Indeed, some another one, ZipRecruiter, and it's just the same crap being recycled over and over again. I've already applied to them, so maybe I need to, sort of broaden my horizons. Which is stupid because we just moved here in November, so I don't really want to have to move again. Uh, but we'll see. The other thing I would say, like lately, is that it's just I think when you have nothing specific you need to do. So if you're working, obviously you've got tasks you need to take care of and people you need to talk to, and your mind's very occupied. And so when you get home, you're maybe a little tired because your attention kind of takes up uh, more of your mind's energy. In the same way that maybe your computer, if you're running a lot of programs in the background, it's kind of taxing on the processing unit. As I can see here, a lot of my computer just keeps trying to install things, which slows everything down. So I have to like kill this installer program, which just kind of randomly starts up every 10 to 15 minutes. And it's really, if I can tell that something's bogged down, it's almost certainly the Windows module installer, or sometimes Skype just randomly turns on. Thinking about uninstalling that since I haven't used it since I've been back in the States. Um, uh, well, anyway, when you're at work, your mind is very focused. It takes a lot of attention the same way your computer. If you're using a lot of programs, it kind of is very taxing on the central processing unit, and it does end up being it kind of slows everything down afterwards. So like if you've worked a long day, you probably aren't going to go read some like heavy duty philosophical texts. You might want to just sort of read something light or watch some TV or I don't know, do something that doesn't require a lot of active thinking. It's, so I understand when people come home from work, like my wife, she comes home from work after a long day of, she's a doctor, a veterinarian, and maybe she doesn't want to talk about deep, heavy subjects. But when you're not doing that as a rule, you kind of seek out that intense thought. You got to get it in some way. So, what can you do? So I've been reading a book lately. So a lot of the news lately is very bad. It's always been bad now that I think about it, but it just seems heavier than ever, doesn't it? I mean, it almost makes me long for the days of September 11th when things were crazy, but were understandable. Now it's just like everyone's fighting with each other. I can't stand people that I used to like because they're just over opinionated assholes on social media. So I just don't look at Facebook very much. But anyway, like in the news, so this is the 18th of February, 2022, and there's a lot of talk about Russia possibly invading the Ukraine. I don't think anybody really knows except for Vladimir Putin. A lot of people talk a lot of crap, but they don't really know. They just, the news just goes out. This guy knows something about Russia. Get on here and tell us some stuff. And it's mostly just a load of nonsense. It's either wishy-washy or, very conditional, if this, then that. And there's just so many like hypothetical situations that you just kind of get lost down in the details or not even the real details, the suppositions. But what I decided is like, hey, I've been going to the library a couple times this week, a week for the last couple months, and I ended up getting a book at a library. I'm about not quite halfway through it. It's called Russia by Martin Sixsmith. So he's number 6 in the Smith family, and it's kind of interesting because he's basically it's about a 500-page book, and he goes through the history of Russia little bit by little bit. It seems to be much more focused on the Soviet Union to present day, but he does talk about in the past, and I found this one area, this one little section about the first Russian Tsar. And they'd had kings before. The Tsar, I guess, has this. I guess the word comes from Kaiser, like Caesar, sort of an emperor title. Very Russian title that they used for about 200 years. So anyway, the first one was Peter the Great. So Peter the Great was raised in a very European environment. All of his teachers, his tutors were all Europeans, like British, German, French, and they exposed him a very different way of thinking. And if you look historically, that one of the things that kind of screwed up Russia was that it started off just sort of in these Slavic tribes in what is now the Ukraine and Russia, and they just got railroaded. I guess they didn't have railroads back then, but they just got run through a million times by the Mongols that they ended up having to abandon any sort of liberal way of thinking and had to be very controlling. And they never really were able to get rid of that mentality. And the longer it goes on, the more it solidifies. And so Peter, this is sort of at the beginning of the 1700s, goes abroad. He works as a shipbuilder in England. He goes to France. He goes to Germany. And he just learns about ways of life that are different from Russia. And then he comes back and he tries to institute some of these policies or some of these institutions. He tries to bring them about, but don't really seem to be going that well with the people of Russia. They kind of want a strong man. And so anyway, Peter kind of goes back and forth with this. He wants to be very forward thinking, but I'll give you an example that he is very authoritarian in his forward thinkingness, is that he essentially ordered all of the men except for the peasants. So I assume like the aristocrats, he ordered them to cut their beards because beards were very Russian, and the Europeans didn't wear beards in that style. It made them look weird, you know, kind of like the hipster sort of wannabe lumberjack look. But so anyway, and he ordered them. I mean, it's not that he's trying to make them modern, but he's being very authoritarian in that attempt. And there's an interesting section here. I won't bore you with too many details, but it's just like a paragraph or so. So it was a question, and this guy's a reporter rather than a historian. So he kind of writes like a reporter rather than sort of historical, like kind of historians can kind of be dry. This is probably trying to be more engaging in the subject matter, which has its pluses and its minuses. So the question is, was Peter a despot or a reformer? In many aspects, he was both. He introduced Western standards of behavior, but he used very un-Western methods to do so. He praised European values, but clung to Asiatic forms of governance. He rejected notions of parliamentary participation, something that was developing in Britain, for example, following the Glorious Revolution and the Bill of Rights in 1688. He pursued efficiency, not democracy. He knew that change was vital because of the tensions in society. The peasant revolts were a symptom of a system straining at the seams. A lot of S's in a row. Straining at the seams, but he wanted control of that change, and he certainly didn't want any reforms that would weaken the autocratic power he himself wielded. So essentially, this guy, Martin Sixsmith, the author of this book, talks about this sort of play between trying to modernize, but the people usually only respond to autocratic behavior. And if you look at, if you read more about Russia than just sort of a 500-page book trying to cover 1,000 years, if you read more about the history of the run-up to the Russian Revolution, as well as the Russian Revolution and then the Soviet Union and all the different phases of the Soviet Union and then the fall of the Soviet Union, you find that Russia only really does well when they have an autocratic ruler. I'm not sure if that's, some of the arguments in the book say that Russian rulers have always thought that the country was too big and too chaotic for democracy to take hold, because it was either too diverse that you would never have sort of a population that you could call a country. It was too diverse that it was more of an empire. It had always been more of an empire than a country of a similar mentality, that you had to rule with an iron fist. And this concept of the iron fist is very Russian. And he makes the case, and I've heard this by other people, that they only respond to extreme strength. And perhaps, when you looked at somebody, for example, Ronald Reagan's approach towards the Soviet Union was to say, we are bigger and we are badder than you, and we've got bigger weapons, and we're scarier than you. They seem to cool off a little bit about trying to either challenge the United States or Western Europe. But when you had a softer approach, they seem to just take advantage of it. So I don't know how many lessons you can learn from the past about other rulers in Russia, and then put them into the situation with Vladimir Putin. But it seems like if you understand the Russian mentality, you might be able to predict things. Now, I know that Vladimir Putin was uh, a KGB officer. And so these people are very. I actually had a professor who was a KGB officer. And he ended up being a Russian history professor later after the Soviet Union collapsed. But these people are very guarded, and they don't show a lot of emotion. It's actually kind of beaten out of them, and they essentially see any sort of emotion or sentimentality as a form of weakness. Um, Perhaps, as they say in the U.S. Marines, that once a Marine, always a Marine. I bet you that a lot of the training that people in the KGB kind of has that similar feel, that once you're a KGB officer, you're always going to be a KGB officer. It's not going to end. You've been trained, and it just sort of cements, and then. But that should be, because if they kind of make him into a mold, it should be more uh, predictable. If you're in a mold, you can kind of tell the dimensions of the mold and the consistency of the thing in the mold. I just think that a lot of what's going on is people just making guesses, and I don't even know what he wants. Nobody's asking what he wants. People are sort of guessing what he wants, but there's not a lot of conversation going on, at least, publicly. So I find it interesting that the media seems to be pushing things more than perhaps anyone else. And I wonder, are they just trying to, deflect from other affairs going on, or are they just trying to make, news for themselves, therefore create work for themselves? I'm not really sure, but it is an interesting situation, and obviously the whole world is going to be paying attention. It's interesting that this is going on during the Olympics, which uh, the Russians are not technically allowed to take part in. If you, I haven't been watching any of it because I don't like China, and I want anything that they get involved with to fail. But not the people, but the government. Their government is. I'm sensing a theme with the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of China, that they tend to be, they're not very friendly people. And if you don't play their way, they will crush you, as you can see throughout Russian history. It's a very different way of looking at the world. But it should be interesting to see what happens after these Olympic Games are over. As I said, that the Russians are not technically allowed to play like a sport in the Olympics. They call themselves like the Russian Olympic Committee, which I don't understand what the difference is. Perhaps they just can't play the Russian national anthem, or they wave their flag. But we all know that these are Russian athletes with blah 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 or blah 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 or something like that. We all know you're Russian. So anyway, I would recommend the book. It is sort of a little bit glib, but if you're trying to cram 1,000 years of history into one book, you're gonna have to make some edits. So anyway, I guess I will talk to you soon. Have a good day. Appreciate the things you have. Don't count your chicks before they've hatched. And if your mom's still around, just tell her you love her. I'll see you soon.